Namaste and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today, we would be analyzing the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper of 21st December 2017. Now let us begin. Now we have taken this news from page 8. Now as you know, the United States recently released its National Security Strategy. Now the features of this strategy has been covered in depth in yesterday's DNS. And this article gives a critique of this policy in reference to India. Now the first point that this article makes is that India should maintain strategic autonomy by avoiding US interference in Indian foreign policy. Now this policy has severely criticized the role of Russia and China in international affairs. And we should not allow the US to interfere in our relations with Russia or with China. And we should maintain unilateral relations with Russia and China. Now the second point this article makes is that India should avoid having the US certifying threats to India's security. It means that this strategy highlights problems which are towards the US security and may or may not have any implications for security of India, wherein Russia might be a threat towards US security, but it is not a security threat towards India. Now the third point this article makes is that the US policy focuses more on verbal rhetoric, wherein this policy the US has acknowledged India as a leading power. But the question is, how is the US supporting India as a leading power? The US is still not supported for a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council. There is no support of the United States for an increase in India's IMF quota. And similarly, there are other instances of no support by the United States. Now the other question that comes up is, where is the United States supporting India as a leading power? Now the fourth and the last critique of this policy is that it promotes an America First policy, which means that the US intends to be the global power, whereas India supports a multipolar world, wherein India and other countries are equally dominant powers in international affairs. Now this raises the question on how these two policies would work with each other. Now hopefully till here you have understood the four critiques to the newly announced National Security Strategy of the United States. So if a question is ever asked in your mains examination in the International Relations section to critically analyze the US security policy, you will be able to answer. Now we move on to our next article. Now we have taken this news from page 8. Now the article has focused upon the critique, wetlands, conservation and management rules of 2017. Now the Wetland 2017 rules replaced the wetland rules of 2010. Now before moving forward, we need to know as to what are wetlands, which I will try to explain with the help of two images. Now a wetland is an area of land saturated and covered with water and supports biodiversity such as aquatic plants, animals, etc. Now there are various types of wetlands, wherein the first image gives an example of a swamp wetland, while the second image gives an example of a marsh wetland. Now hopefully up till here you have understood the definition of a wetland and also have a visual understanding of what is a wetland. And therefore we move on to the main section, which is the critique of the Wetland Rules 2017. Now the first critique of the 2017 Wetland Rules is of definition. Now, in the 2010 wetland rules, there were specific definitions of what can be classified as wetlands, whereas the 2017 wetland rules omit specific classification of wetlands. Now, this provision dilutes the law and ability to protect wetlands in India. Now, the second critique is of management. Now, the 2017 rules has decentralized management to states and union territories. Now, the problem with this provision is that there are no specific guidelines or rules for governing management, while similarly, there are no penalties for mismanagement. Now, moving on to the third critique. Now, the third critique is based on the provision of wise use restrictions. Now, in the 2017 wetland rules, restrictions on activities on wetlands will be based upon the principle of wise use as determined by the state wetland authority. Now, it is being criticized on the principle that the term wise use is subjective in nature and is therefore open to misuse. Now, the fourth and the last critique is based upon ecological criteria. Now, in the 2010 wetland rules, there was a mention of what is called multiple interest, meaning there were certain ecological criteria such as genetic diversity, historical value, and several others that form the multiple interests of a wetland. Now, in the 2017 wetland rules, there is an omission of ecological criteria. Now, by omitting this ecological criteria, the 2017 rules do not provide a comprehensive protection of wetlands. Now, up till here, you have understood the four critiques of the 2017 wetland rules. So, if a question is asked in your mains examination in the environment section that would ask you to critique the 2017 wetland rules or the current scenario of protection towards wetlands in India, or any other question related to this topic, you would be able to answer. Now we move on to our next article. Now we have taken this news from page 10. Now this article talks about the Consumer Protection Bill 2017. Now the first question that is asked is, why is this in the news? Now the Cabinet has approved introduction of the Consumer Protection Bill 2017. Now, if this bill is passed by Parliament, it would repeal the Consumer Protection Act of 1986. Now, the second question that is asked is, what are the features of this bill? Now, this bill proposes stricter actions against misleading advertisements and against food adulteration. Now, on misleading advertisements, the bill provides for a fine and a ban on celebrities if they are part of misleading advertisements. While on food adulteration, the bill provides for a penalty and a jail sentence in case of food adulteration. Now, up till here, you have understood why the Consumer Protection Bill is in the news and on how the bill intends to deal with the problem of misleading advertisements and of food adulteration. Now, apart from this, there are two other features of this bill. The first is to regulate e-commerce, and the second is to establish a central consumer protection authority. Now, this protection authority has three objectives: to promote, protect, and enforce consumer rights. Now, the third and the last point is the bill also provides for class action cases to be raised by a group of consumers to redress their grievances. Now, hopefully, up till here, you have understood the three features of the Consumer Protection Bill 2017. You understand as to what is the Central Consumer Protection Authority. Now, hopefully, if any question is asked in your essay or in your mains examination on consumer protection, you would be able to answer. Now we move on to our next article. Now we have taken this news from page 11. Now, as you may know, the United States has moved its embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Now, recently, a resolution was introduced in the United Nations Security Council which criticized the US decision. Now, this resolution was supported by the 14 members of the United Nations Security Council, while this resolution was vetoed by the United States. In this, the United States asserted that other countries cannot decide the location of the US Embassy, and it is the decision of the United States to locate its embassy wherever it wants. Now, after this resolution was vetoed by the United States, a new resolution has been introduced in the United Nations General Assembly. Now, this resolution again criticizes the US decision. Now, this resolution has been introduced by the Arab countries. Now, the problem here is that, and what this article highlights also, is what would be the decision of India on whether it would support this resolution or be against it. Now, up till here, we understand why this topic is again in the news, what is it about, and how it impacts India, apart from a brief history of this topic. Now, moving further, we need to understand as to the position of India. Now, India's position on US decision is that India will maintain an independent foreign policy and its decision will not be influenced by any third country. So it means that India will maintain an independent foreign policy with regards to the Israel-Palestine problem and will have an independent policy with regard to Jerusalem. Now, India's position on Jerusalem has been that India would support a joint decision by Israel and Palestine on the territorial claims on Jerusalem. Now, up till here, you understand what is the position of India on the US decision to move its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and the position of India on the Jerusalem issue. Now, the issue of Jerusalem would also be covered in depth in the upcoming January edition of the Focus magazine. Now we move on to our next article. Now we have taken this news from page 13. Now, what is important from this article is to understand the concept of social security. Now, the answer to this question is important from your mains examination point of view, where it is required that you have a basic understanding of what is social security and how it relates to social justice and ethics. Now, social security is a program of protection provided by society and or government in form of monetary benefits and other entitlements to the vulnerable section. Now, hopefully, till here you understand what it is, who is it provided by, in which form is it provided, and to whom Social Security is provided to. Now, these vulnerable sections could be of old age individuals, pregnant women, differently abled individuals, and among others. Now, this article also highlights certain Social Security schemes also. One of the schemes it highlights is for old age individuals, which is the National Old Age Pension Scheme. And the second scheme it highlights is the Pradhan Mantri Matru Vandana Yojana, which provides maternity benefits to pregnant women. Now both these schemes are provided by the government. Now hopefully through these schemes you would be able to provide examples while explaining social security. Now with this we come to an end to the analysis of today's newspaper. Now we move on to the question for today.